Kutaki no Ha, Episode 13, November 18th, 2005.
Kutaki podcast, so it's kind of like the Bujinkan thing. Because when people talk about the Bujinkan website, they talk about Kutaki. They're not talking about all the other stuff that's out there. Whatever there is out there, I'm sure there's other stuff.
Irashaimase! Welcome to Kutaki no Ha, the podcast dedicated to the Bujinkan martial arts of Masaaki Hatsumi Soke and to the spirit of cooperation and friendship in the Bujinkan community. I'm Shawn Gray, your host for the podcast. The opening music we were just listening to was by Armcore Project with Temple of God. Very good stuff from them. And we've got a lot of other interesting stuff on the show today as well. Another Japanese phrase for the day, some talk about ukemi, also some talk with Rob Renner from Florida, who has moved to Japan. He's on Kutaki under the nickname of Mind Wrench. We'll be talking to him in just a few minutes. We'll start off with Better Japanese, and I tried to get a hold of Maki to give us another Japanese phrase for the day here.
ただいま電話に出ることができません。ピというハスキー音の後にお名前、ご用件をお話しください。
もしもし、ショーンだけど、今回の Better Japanese with Maki を作ってくれるようにお願いするつもりだったんだけど、いないようだからまた連絡するよ。じゃあね。Seems that Maki isn't around at the moment, so we'll just use a phrase that I actually used in my message to her, and I said that I would contact her again. And the word for contact in Japanese is renraku. Renraku. And to spell that in Roman letters, it would be R-E-N-R-A-K-U. And when you add a verb ending onto that, to do, to contact, you use the ending form of the to-do verb, which is suru, renraku suru, which means to contact. And that can be by phone or mail or email or whatever. And when you're talking about contacting someone again at another time, for example, you use the Japanese word mata, M-A-T-A, mata. So if you were to say, I'll contact you again, you say, mata renraku suru. Mata renraku suru. The thing is with Japanese verbs is that the ending of the verb changes to indicate the politeness level that you're using. So if you're saying this to someone who is kind of in a socially higher position than you are, for example your sensei or something like this, or someone that's older that you're being polite to, you would say shimasu instead of suru. So if you were talking to your sensei, for example, you would say mata renraku shimasu. Mata renraku shimasu. Okay, so that's it for the Japanese phrase for the day. Contact you again later. Mata renraku shimasu. Anyone notice how my voice is sounding all like sticky? It's like you can hear all the saliva in my mouth when I'm talking. And I think it's because of this new headset that I got in an attempt to actually improve the sound quality. Now you get to hear all my little mouth movements and slobbering sounds, so I'm going to torture you with that for this episode until I get it straightened out. Another thing that I really messed up with the recording with this new headset thing was this conversation I had with Rob Renner on Skype the other day, and we had a conversation, and it was just, we hadn't really planned it as an interview. It was just a really informal, casual conversation, and I was testing some recording. And when I played back the test at first, I just heard his voice, so I thought, okay, the recording's fine. But I didn't play it long enough to see if my voice was recorded or not. So then after the whole conversation was finished, and I'd actually recorded quite a bit of it, and after we'd already hung up and said goodbye and everything, and I played it back, I realized that the mic input from my end had not been recorded at all. So I just had this big, long, one-sided conversation from Rob. And I didn't really know what to do with it. Should I use it? Should I not? Should I try to, get an interview out of it? But a lot of it is pretty witty and really raw and funny. So I thought it would have some entertainment value, if nothing else. So I decided to use it anyway and got Rob's permission to do so. So I'm just going to play some clips of that conversation where Rob does a lot of the talking, and I'll just kind of come in and put my own voice in to kind of segue in between the different parts so people know kind of what we were talking about at the time. So it's not really an interview. It wasn't planned as an interview. So it's a bit rough and raw in places, but I hope you find it amusing and maybe a little bit educational as well. Here you go.
Welcome back to Kutaki Podcast. With us in the studio, we have Rob Renner. But it sounds like the guy who was introducing Rob sounds just like Rob. Yeah, Rob has a very big ego. It's separated into several different parts. Yeah, what can we talk about? Well, Paul and I were shooting some video yesterday. It was pretty cool. Just kind of getting together some ideas. We're going to be doing a video involving just a variety of different Bujinkan people, like from a Western perspective. You know, not the typical, just Japanese and then having everything translated. We're going to kind of hit people from all, especially with Daikomi side coming up, there'll be people from all over the world here. So, and we're going to do the people that live here, of course. We went to Ayase. Yeah. So we could practice filming some stuff in there. And we're going to let people, like show what they think is important about whatever's going on right now. A brief clip. And so it's kind of neat. It should be interesting. Because, we're gonna talk to a lot of people. And just, you can compare side by side kind of, you know what I mean? And see, it should be interesting for people. Yeah. We kind of want to do it the way Hatsumi does, which is Hatsumi shows the shit along with the good stuff. You know what I mean? And lets people have to figure out what's what. He's got to be. I mean, I definitely know for sure that he's learning from the people out there training. I watch him, like go and take something someone else did and just do it next. You know what I mean? So I know he's learning, but he's probably got to be making judgment calls as well. Like, man, that dude sucks. I would just love to hear that, in Japanese. Like, God.
Well, from there, Rob and I got talking about some of the idiosyncrasies of Japanese culture and some of the things that maybe Westerners find a little bit frustrating about Japanese culture sometimes. So here's an experience that Rob had which kind of exemplified that a little bit.
Dude, when Paul and I went to Ayase yesterday, and he starts talking to this old woman behind the counter. And I warned him beforehand, but he forgot. So he's like, okay, we want to use a room with tatami. She's like, well, it's available till 4:30, and it's 4:45 now, right? I was like, okay, well, then what we'll do is we'll take that till 4:30, then we'll switch over to the hardwood floor thing. She's like, you can't do that. Like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you can't do that. You're paying for this room. You gotta use this room. It's like, what? Well, we get a 2-hour pass, and we want to use the room, but we want to use tatami when we can. You can't do that. It's not in the rule book, basically. He's like, okay. And he had a Japanese friend. He's like, so I'm going to go to the tatami room. He wants to use the hardwood floor, and we're just going to switch over and go over there. And he's like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, dude, in English, I'm like, dude. I'm like, why are you asking? You don't ask stuff like that. You just pay your money, walk in, and go do your thing. Because there's no way. That's outside the box. You know what I mean? That's not written down in the rule book what to do, so they cannot let you do that. So it was just funny. He's like, I don't understand. I'm like, dude, you've been living in Japan for 11 years. How could you not understand this? So I go through that process quite a bit there at Undo Koen. I did at the beginning. Now I know. I just go do what I want. And there's some older guys there, and they like us because we're English, and they like to speak a little bit of English when we come in, It's funny. So they're like, hey, how are you? Yes. And then that's about their English. So it's pretty cool.
From there, the conversation kind of changed into how Rob and Pete Reynolds got their training group going, and I thought some people who listen to the podcast probably know them, and so I thought it might be interesting for people to hear a little bit about how they got their group started. So here's Rob's take on that.
Well, here's the deal. What's really is this. I was teaching in Neizu. I was staying at Pete's place, so I started teaching there at the Neizu Jinja. They didn't have a place. And so I got my students, and I said, Pete, you need to start teaching with me. So after a few months, he said, okay, let's do that. And then we had Chiori, Pete's wife, go find some locations for us to train at, and that was a complete pain in the ass. I mean, we helped too, but then we got the locations. It's I would rather we just did it all in Kitamatsudo because we got a better location here and whatnot. But we already booked up for several months for Nezu. What's nice about this is, you just come in and unless someone's got an area booked up, where they've paid for the whole thing and they won't let you in there. There's so many spaces here that you can go up into we usually use the little, it's not little, it's a big gymnastics room, and they have some wrestling mat set up in one part. I just use that, and it's big. I mean, I could have 40 people on that fucking wrestling mat, and if I want to book it myself, it's 750 yen an hour. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't do that. I look and see no one else got it booked, and we just pay the 200 yen per person and go in there. So, it's nice.
At this point in the conversation, Rob received a phone call on his mobile phone from someone telling him that his visa had come through. And so I got to actually overhear his initial reaction to getting his visa, and it was really quite cool because I just tend to forget, but there's nothing really like the elation that a foreigner feels when they receive their visa or their paperwork approval from the immigration department, and it's like a big relief that finally you're stable and you're ready to go here, either on your first visa or even almost every extension, because there's always that chance that it might not come through. But congratulations to Rob, he's got his visa, so he's good to go. He got his certificate of eligibility, so he just needs to go pick it up now.
Oh, I'm stoked, man. Okay. Yeah. I got my certificate of eligibility. I was afraid they'd see through all my bullshit stuff. Wait, is that going on the podcast? It can. No, but I will censor myself a little bit just so I don't get deported.
Well, what did you think about all the red tape at the Japanese immigration and all the procedures you had to go through?
Japanese immigration, exactly. Or just any Japanese procedures. Tell me anything. Okay, next, we want you to come down and get your gaijin registration card. Well, what I need? Well, your passport and the address where you're staying. Cool. Okay, so I go down. Here's my stuff. All right, okay. Come back in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? What's going on in 3 weeks? You doing like some kind of research? No. It just takes 3 weeks. What are you talking about? In America, you go down, they print it up on the machine right there, and they give it to you, and you go away. And they're like, no, it takes 3 weeks. Good Lord. That's insane.
Insanity can be a thing that really frustrates a lot of people in Japan, especially if you keep asking why about stuff and trying to actually figure it out from a Western perspective. And a lot of people eventually just kind of come to peace with it by just accepting that things are different here, and that's just the way things go. And you can't beat them, you gotta join them sometimes. The next thing Rob and I talked about was a bit about the Kutaki website, and Rob had a few good points about how to look at and look at conversations and discussions on the site, and has a good perspective on the way to kind of look at and participate in discussion.
Well, there's many times when I look at like a thread or something, I'm like, okay, I want to jump in here, and then I'm like, but you know what? Just because I disagree with someone or they're going off on this wild ass tangent, it's kind of up to the readers to figure this out, and maybe the tangent is got some merit to it or something. I just don't see it right now. I don't know. So it's difficult to do that, to not put your own personal subjective whatever onto it and try and crush everyone else, because it's fun to crush people. Remember that what you're reading doesn't necessarily mean it's true just because someone's posting it. And don't get all worked up about someone's post. We're letting all these different views and things be put on here and go in different ways, and people post with certain styles, whether it's a bashing style or whatever. And you have to learn to, take all the information you get and make judgment calls on it.
And that was Rob's take on posting. And again, it's kind of an abrupt end to the conversation, but that's due to the problems I mentioned before, and the conversation ended up being just him that was recorded. So we're going to actually have another proper interview with Rob in another episode coming up in the near future. So for now, I hope you found that educational and entertaining. As the next topic for this episode, I'd like to plug the fact that I have about 600 pairs of tabi sitting around me in my apartment at this very moment. And these tabi were left over from stock that Andrew Young had when he lived in Japan, and that he had been selling. And so we have about 600 pairs of Jika tabi, outdoor tabi, with the rubber sole. And I'm trying to actually get rid of these so that Andrew can make back the money on the stock that he initially invested, and also so that I can now clear out the space in my apartment and actually have room to walk around. So Christmas is coming up, guys, and I really think that all your friends need about 20 pairs of tabi each, just to make sure that, they can get through the rest of their lives. So if you want to really make somebody's day, let me know, and I would be happy to sell you about as many tabi as you could possibly want. Speaking of Andrew Young, in case anybody doesn't know, Andrew left Japan in August and moved to Sweden, where he's teaching the Bujinkan martial arts in the town of Gothenburg on the west coast of Sweden. And the dojo there is located at www.budo.org if you want to check their site out. And if anybody is listening to this and happens to see Andrew, please let him know that he's sorely missed, and I really miss our long chats over a can of Chuhai after training in Kashiwa on Wednesday and Thursday nights. Andrew was a great mentor and senpai to me in the years that he was here, and really helped me to get acclimated and just used to Japan and used to training, and we had so many good talks, and I really miss the guy. So I just wanted to say, Andrew, if you're out there listening by any chance, hope you're doing well. While we're on the subject of shoutouts, I wanted to mention that I got a mail from Alex Martinez, and he said, "Hi Shawn, enjoying your podcast very much and would appreciate it if you could mention the unofficial Bujinkan Dojo locator map at www.frapper.com/Bujinkan, as moderated by myself and my Shidoshi Alex Mihan in your next podcast." So there it is. It's been mentioned. www.frapper.com/Bujinkan, and Frapper is spelled Frappr. There is no E. If you have something that you'd like to announce to the Bujinkan community, some kind of shout out or anything, you can send me a mail and I'll read it, or if you want to get really interesting, just send me an MP3 file and I'll play that on the show. The address to send those to is podcast@kutaki.org. So thanks for people who have sent in feedback and submissions, and I look forward to hearing from others. I mentioned at the beginning of the show that we'd mentioned a little bit about Ukemi in his podcast, and that was basically brought on by some thoughts I had about training with someone in the past week who is fairly new to training. And when we were doing the technique, of course, we were starting out in a very basic way, and it was a basic throwing technique. And this person obviously did not really want to be thrown, and they were resisting the technique and kind of walking and placing a foot ahead so that it was more difficult to throw them, and was really it was actually an omotagyaku throw, so this person was really kind of forcing me to actually really put the omotagyaku on in a painful way, or else they wouldn't go down. And it just kind of made me think about the concept of ukemi and the fact that ukemi is actually a proactive thing, which is to be done before it gets to the point where you're actually having damage done to you. And so the reason that you should be taking ukemi is not because you're necessarily being forced to by the other person, but as a proactive preventive measure for protecting yourself from being injured. Obviously, if you are doing a technique to someone on the street who doesn't train in martial arts, especially if they don't do ukemi practice, their reaction to the technique is going to be much different, and probably they will receive a lot more damage because they're not reacting in a self-protective way. So when you're on the receiving end of a technique, maybe try to think about what is the best way for you to receive that technique, and what's the most efficient way for you to kind of escape, and this kind of thing. And I think ukemi should kind of be thought about in that kind of way, not only in a kind of passive way, in the aspect of that you're just standing there having the technique done to you, and you're kind of got your mind made up not to move unless the other person absolutely forces you to. If you kind of think that way, try to just reverse your thinking a bit and look at it in a bit more kind of proactive way, in that you are actually the person who's doing the technique. Even though you're on the receiving end, you're still the person who's doing the technique, and your technique is the escaping ukemi movement. Just another way that you might want to look at ukemi. In the situation that I mentioned, we were doing the very basic technique at the first, which didn't have all the other kicks and strikes added onto it yet, because we were just starting out in a very basic manner, and that's why the person was actually able to step. But as training progressed, the teacher added more strikes and kicks into the technique, which made it much more difficult for the other person to step. So even though you might be doing a technique which seems very simple in training in a class, that may be just the teacher's way of progressing in the training in that class, and he may very well add things onto it. So just because you think a technique may not work so well, or may not be a very good technique the first time you see it, just be patient and ask the teacher about it later, and it may be that he is just working through a progression in teaching, and it actually may make more sense to you in the next, say, half an hour, or the next day after you've done it.
This is Paji from Paji's Tokyo Talk, and you are listening to Kutaki no Ha, the podcast all about Kutaki, I think. And it's ha, but that's not a funny ha-ha, that's a wave ha-ha. The wave of Kutaki. Listen, if you're a martial artist and you're interested. If you're not interested and you're not a martial artist, don't listen to it. Listen to me, Paji, Tokyo Talk. Bye.
It's time to wrap up this episode. Thanks for listening once again, and if you have a chance, hop over to podcastalley.com and give us a vote. Kutaki no Ha thanks you for your votes and for listening. Have a good night.